Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is Abhinav Agarwal, your host for the Indic Book Club Open House with Otis. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, we have been doing this for over 6 months now. And the intent is, as the title suggests, to help people, aspiring writers, authors, or anyone who wants to improve their writing, to make use of this platform and avenue and send in their writing pieces to Otis via email, and he reviews, edits, and marks them up with his feedback, sends them back to you. Then when we meet on Sundays, and this is generally the time that we've been meeting now for some time, at 8 p.m. India time, obviously we will change the time once daylight savings ends in the US, which should be sometime in October or November. We go through all of the writing pieces submitted, and Otis reviews them. He discusses them, and as always shares his feedback on the writing pieces. Now, one last word about the writing pieces themselves. The suggested length is approximately 750 to 800 words. So you put them in a Word document, Times New Roman, font size 12, double spaced, and you send it as a PDF because it makes for easier markup, feedback, and all. And you send it as a PDF, and the email is on our post on the indicacademy.org website where we announce this. I am going to share this via the chat function also. There is a WhatsApp group also. I will share the link to the WhatsApp group, and over to you, Otis.
Okay, thank you. Better make sure we have Jay here. We have one piece for this week, and it's a clever piece, and I think it's going to give us a entrance into talking about something that's pretty important for our storytelling, and it's well done, and it is clever, and it's funny. Jay is here. Good. Jay, you're on the hot seat. Jay, if you can come on here.
Right. Can you see me, hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you right now.
I can also hear you, Jay. I can't see your video yet.
Okay. For some reason, the start video option continues to be disabled on my end.
Can anyone else start their video just to be sure that this is not... Yes, so Ram, you can... Perfect, thank you. So I have also sent you an option to ask you to start your video.
Yeah,
Jess.
I tried that, didn't work.
Okay.
Should I get out and get in again? Or is this all right?
If you can, that would be good. It shouldn't take more than half a minute or so we can probably wait that long.
Okay. How's everyone's Sunday evening?
It was raining here, which is always good. This is the monsoon season, so it's been raining off and on for the last, I think, 1 hour.
And during the monsoon, is there sort of a prescribed amount of rain that you expect and hope to get in order for everything to work out well? And has that been continuing basically as planned?
For most parts of the country, the monsoon has been within the normal range, the normal historical range, give or take 5 or 10%. and it will continue to, I mean, the July and August are the main monsoon months. We get some monsoon rain in September also. So far, everything is good. Reservoirs are slowly filling up.
Right. If it doesn't happen, is there a threat? There would be a threat of drought, and then.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, given that the monsoons play such an important role in both agriculture as well as the water supply, if the monsoon fails, in the sense of it is, and drought is considered where the monsoon is more than 20% deficient from its long-term average, that's considered a drought. And that's last time it happened was more than, I think, 15 years back. So while India has enough to ensure that there is no famine and people don't die of starvation, they don't have food and all, but it still causes severe socioeconomic distress.
Mm-hmm. Right, of course. Okay, let's return to Jay. Jay, you have the only piece this week. So that means, yeah, you're probably like, oh wait, if I knew that, I would not have sent it. And that does mean that the rest of you who are here, you have a responsibility to help your cohort not suffer the full blare of my attention for the period. But Jay, this is a clever piece. I enjoyed it. I'm going to have you read a little bit of it. It's
okay.
It's what I had a professor. My professor, I'd rather cut off both hands and write this paragraph. Professor Bill Harrison, he would have called this experimental, right? It's a little bit postmodern. Postmodern might have some tricky definitions, but the way postmodern sort of developed in literature is that I think this defines it fairly well. It's self-reflective, right? It draws attention to itself. That's sort of the postmodern state. It's self-aware of what it's doing, and this story is obviously self-aware of being a story. And so in that way, it's postmodern. My mentor, Bill Harrison, would have said that it was also experimental. And what he said about experimental is this. He said, I'm going to substitute, he used football, but I'm going to substitute, cricket, for the sake of context. He said, if you invite everyone for a cricket game, and you step into the middle of the field and you start juggling, you better be a hell of a juggler. So I think we can take that point. When we bring, just to understand when we do something experimental, how good it has to be, because everyone's coming in expecting to have a story in which they're going to laugh and they're going to cry and they're going to have their world changed forever, and instead you do something that's clever and intellectual in a sense. It better be really clever and really, sharp. So we should know that when we start. Let's have you read some, since it is the piece of the week.
Okay.
Hopefully you can see my share. I'm just going to have
I can.
The first page, and then you can stop it at the yellow.
Okay. From the beginning, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. I found him sitting on the parapet wall of the bridge, staring at white lines that divided one side of the traffic from another. The lines seemed to have caught his fancy. His eyes moved slowly from left to right until they reached the end of the bridge. Once they hit the corner, they darted back to the beginning as though he were reading a novel that was written on the white lines. This early in the morning, there was no vehicular movement to disturb what seemed like his intense study of plain lines of white paint on the tar road. From time to time, he would scratch his head, almost oblivious to the existence of the bucket cap he wore, and then start moving his eyes again. His unkempt beard penetrated his overcoat, partially covering the holes on it. I did not know if I was being rude by staring at him, but for some reason I couldn't take my eyes off him. All right, you've said enough. I was startled by his gruff voice. Excuse me? Yeah, you. You've described me enough. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to bother you. I'll be on my way. No, it's not time for you to leave now. You're supposed to be sitting here by my side. But don't say too much about me. That was a little disturbing. Not only did this loafer tell me that it was time for me not to leave, but he was also telling me what I was supposed to do. And how did he know that I was talking about him or narrating?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I changed that to narrating since it's even more self-conscious because he's not really talking about him, of course. He's narrating the experience. He's being the narrator. And so how did he know that I was narrating? This is clever. I mean, one of the things that you do so nicely in this is that we have the protagonist, right, is the I, and then we have the antagonist, which is basically him. So I just marked that right in the beginning. For all of us, this is sort of a, Jay, I appreciate you, sort of taking this on, and I see that you're like dealing with these ideas that we're talking about, and I like that a lot too. You're obviously taking in the stuff that, I'm saying about stories, and you're like, okay, how do I apply this? How do I do it? And then but at the same time, I'm perceiving that you're a little bit rebellious about it because you're like, what the hell is he doing telling me how I'm supposed to write a story? Okay, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it self-consciously. And pay him back once and for all, damn him. So I like that. Right at the beginning, we have the protagonist and antagonist set up in the first sentence. I think that basically always works. It sets up the conflict. Is there truly a conflict between these two throughout this piece? I'd say that there is. And the conflict that's being presented is sort of this the I does not know really the state of the world, in a sense, the world here being that they're within this world of a story, and the protagonist does not know that, and this other character, the tertiary character as you call him, does know that they're within a story. So it's sort of the what do I want to say, the unenlightened protagonist, which is again correct. The protagonist is always coming in essentially an unenlightened state, because what happens throughout the course of the story is that they arrive at an enlightened state of some kind. That's the change that occurs. That can be, Jay, I'm going to have you mute, and then when you're called upon to, say that I'm wrong about all of this, then you'll come back in. Okay, so that's also correct in a sense. We do want that because we want to show a change from state A to state B in the character. We want the protagonist to come in enlightened. They do not come in with the enlightenment that they're going to arrive at, because that means we would have a straight line through the entire story. They come in unenlightened, they go through the course of the story, and they arrive at a kind of enlightenment. So I think that that's also working. The thing when I woke up this morning thinking about this story, I was sort of like, what isn't working about this story? Because of course we want to try and deal with that too. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat was that I don't feel that this world is real for me, right? So that's one of the experimental qualities of it. It kind of reminds me, it does remind me a little bit of Sartre's No Exit, if you've read that. The three characters, I think it's three characters, someone will remind me, but three characters are in hell, but hell is not really a real place. It's just sort of an empty stage. And this is kind of an empty stage too. It doesn't have the details of actual place. It's just a bridge. They're just lines. They're just characters, real or not real. So we don't have that reality to sort of grapple with. And I guess that led me to think about, like, why do we want those things? Why do we want that sense of reality? And it seems to me that we want that sense of reality because we want the reader to be able to truly identify with the reality of the character, which I think in a way they are not able to do if we don't have that world of reality. So I think that that might be, you know, I'll go back to, you know, Bill Harrison, who said, you know, who talked about the juggling. Maybe that's part of the issue with you have to be a hell of a juggler. Because if you're not going to be dealing with that reality, the reality of the cricket match, which everyone is coming to see, right? And which everyone experiences themselves, the human struggle that they exist in every single day, they then see it basically mirrored in the characters that they're reading about. They can identify with that struggle. But if we do not have that reality on the page, if we instead have this experiment and we have this sort of abstract construction that we place in a petri dish for our examination, the reader can't engage in that way. And therefore, we have to engage them in a different way. It's not going to be this emotional connection, you know, this sort of physical and emotional connection. It is going to be an intellectual connection. I think we should think a long time about that. For all of us as writers, I know that you know, in my writing career, I've also been faced with this, right? You know, as I'm a writer coming up, I want to be clever and I want to be smart and I want to show people that. But I think that the intellectual connection between what we write and work on and what that connection between the reader and the writing is, for me, in the end, a little bit weaker than the emotional connection. And it can be kind of difficult because, you know, once we understand that, it's like, I don't know. I mean, we feel like we're sort of like, you know, puppet masters. You know, we're writing stories and we're like, we're doing all the things that we need to do in order to create this emotional connection. And it's like, well, we're just doing it because we understand that it works. And that's a tough place to grapple. I agree with that. Then I also was thinking some other things. So I'm going to show you. So this other, I made these notes. Okay, so the way my mind works in terms of stories. So Jay, I was thinking about your story in terms of this structure, right? And, you know, this is one that, you know, you're obviously doing some things in the story. You're confronting your protagonist with the antagonist. You're creating a kind of struggle that we could probably plot here. And at the end, you basically present this young woman who's also somewhere in this environment, jumps into the river. Our protagonist is a swimmer, and the tertiary character, as we can call him, says, you know, go get her. And you also very nicely cut it there. Very smart, because we don't need to continue. It's clearly that's what's going to take place now. We don't have to have some kind of ending. You're working on the principle, I feel, that I've said before, that we end when everything else in the story is inevitable. And so I feel you doing that. That's also great, and I think it works. Well, the thing that I think we're missing, in a sense, is we're missing the reality of this character, really the protagonist. So we're getting an external struggle, and so let's see, what can I do here? I'm screen sharing. I'm going to use this pen. Okay, so we're getting this external struggle where the protagonist basically here meets the antagonist, him. Sorry, I can't write with my mouse. Right? And then we follow the line of the argument, really, and it brings the protagonist to a state of struggle and then brings him to a state of action. Okay, so I think all of that's working. But what I think that we're lacking is the reality of the character, which is represented by the internal struggle. I did think to myself, in a sense, like, how do I connect with this character? Why do I care about what's happening to him on this surface level, And that's the internal struggle, which is kind of missing, it seems to me. So that led me to think about, so I've already tried to isolate whether the character changes, and I feel that the character does change. The character begins at a state of non-action and moves to a state of action. So I do think that that's happening along this course, but we don't really know. This is the way I think of it sometimes. So character and plot are not really separate things. Every character has their plot, and every plot has its character. And what that leads me to think is, why does this protagonist need this story? What's the internal issue for this character that requires, it's sort of like destiny, right? Destiny, what the universe is saying, you, protagonist, must meet this person and must be driven to this conclusion. And that's the internal struggle. So that the antagonist is basically there to challenge this person's internal struggle and bring them to a state of, I don't know, completion or something like that. So I drew this picture, and I feel like you have this external struggle here, but what's lacking is any sense of the internal struggle. The sort of the reality of the complex character, which, because you're doing something that's kind of experimental and kind of postmodern, you're sort of able to kind of push aside and not really deal with. So we can say this is reflecting the change of character state. And you notice I put a little, I usually just use an X for character, but then I had an X here and an X here. And so I put a little head on it so that the character is sort of upside down. I sort of like that. You know, it's like that tarot card, the upside down man. So their world has been changed. It's been reversed. And we typically say of stories, when we get to the end of it, you know, that character has changed, but the reader also sees the world differently. And I think that that's also a little bit reflected in sort of this idea of we've now reversed things and we see the world in a different way. Then I just, because I was going on this line of thought, I drew this diagram that basically is taking the same picture. We'll notice it kind of looks like an infinity sign, which I also like, basically, because there's two basic movements, it seems to me, in a story. One is linear, moving this way, but one is also circular, because when we get to the end of the story, we basically resolve the problem of the beginning of the story, and that creates a kind of circularity. So with those two movements, one going this way and the circularity, I thought that was sort of nicely expressed in what ends up kind of looking like a infinity symbol, which also looks a little bit like the chiasmus thing that we've talked about before. So I do like that. Then I go back to it and I sort of shaded it like this. So in the first half of the story, what we have, it seems to me, is we have an emphasis on the external struggle. It's the dominant story. But in the middle, something occurs that reverses that, right? So that we understand that actually the dominant story is the internal struggle, and the external struggle kind of fades away. I've expressed this before using Bonnie and Clyde as the example. So in the story of Bonnie and Clyde, they meet each other, they go to rob banks. They rob banks for a while, and they are successful, and they have all this money. It seems as if what they want is money. But in the middle, they have all the money they could ever want, and what do? They rob another bank. There's no purpose to robbing the bank anymore for money because they have enough of it. So why are they robbing another bank? Because doing that action is about something else. It's about resolving this internal struggle. So that's my example of how this kind of works. We have a dominant, in the first half, we have the dominant external struggle. And in the second half of the story, that external struggle is still there, but it's been subordinated. So I'm trying to suggest that it's not disappeared. And this is the thing in your story that I think is missing. We have the external struggle, but we're missing this sense. Like in the beginning, in the first half of a story, the internal struggle is just sort of, it's subordinate, but it's not there. We feel it. And then in the second part, it emerges as dominant. And so, yeah, so that's sort of what I wanted to say. I think that it's this part, what I've marked here in green, that in a sense is missing here. And Jay, like in this story, which is short, it's compact, it's elegant, the sentences are great. Obviously saying that almost half of the story, the emotional quality of the story is missing, is rather large. And it's very difficult to it's very difficult to find that aspect of the story. That's actually the harder work. The external struggle of the story, whether it's this story, which is clever and I like it, and experimental, or the bank robbery, right? The bank robbery story is very easy. That external struggle is easy. I want money is very easy. The material struggle, if we want to look at it that way. The hard work for the writer, the hardest work for the writer, is to discover this deeper humanity of our characters, to discover the internal struggle of not only our characters, but really the internal struggles that resonate with our readers. Our readers have these same internal struggles, and they're mirrored in our characters, and that is the great connection between our characters and our stories and our readership. And it's the big thing that they're reading for. The resolution of these deep, universal, internal struggles. That's my speech today. Jay, chime in.
I was just trying to see if this, how this would come out. I mean, I was just trying to see what it would be like if there was, if there was one character in the story. I mean, incidentally, I mean, this comes from the Mahabharata, where the author himself is also a character in the story. He keeps coming in and out whenever there is some sort of there is this Deus Ex Machina thing where you have the God hand that comes in and tries to move things further when there doesn't seem to be any exit out of the present problem.
Yeah.
So
it's funny that you say that, because I actually knew that about the Mahabharata.
Yeah.
Vasya is like a narrator, and then he also sometimes appears as a character in a story. I actually just read a story in which he comes in to perform a function in the story, which, the Mahabharata in its sort of the sense of the narrator who comes in and can go out of the story is kind of postmodern, actually. I mean, that goes along with this sort of definition of postmodernism. It's sort of self-aware in its way. It's really interesting. Yes, I know, Jay, that you were just experimenting for sure. I knew that. And so I was using the story, since you did that, as a springboard to talk about these other issues, not because I thought you were intending to try and make this a very deep and significant story about character. I saw that was absent. But I like to try and figure out a way to say something about stories that's going to be useful for everybody. I also, I have to say that, like, I admire the fact that you're really taking in these ideas about storytelling and grappling with them and then applying them, in your work. And it's a kind of intellectual tenacity. So I guess I'm saying I see the intellectual tenacity, and what I'm gonna say is what you're gonna need to add to your storytelling, from my point of view anyway, is that emotional tenacity, right? There's an emotional, like, to really drive in. I never had any talent writing, but I've always tried to figure out how can I write well, and I really wanted to know and understand characters, and by that I mean actually people. Like, I really wanted to understand what was driving people. I wanted to make sense of the world. And so that was my driving aspiration. Um, and I want to just lead you that way a little bit. But I see someone obviously here who's very engaged in their writing. And it did lead me to think, to ask you about if you were in school still or working, or whether you were maybe thinking about pursuing writing in maybe pursuing like a writing program or something like that, because this kind of intellectual tenacity shows that you definitely are interested in this this process. Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, I am very much interested in this, but I work full time. I work with the government of India. So unless I take a break, a sabbatical of some sort to do this, yeah, maybe that is something that is in the future.
Uh-huh. I like that. I like that. I work with them, the government of India.
Yeah.
But for what it's worth, Otis, the good thing is that a lot of very fine writers have come out of the civil services. So I think the range of experience and situations that civil servants go through, I think, only enriches their experiences and the well of experience, so to say, to draw upon. So I think we can look forward to a lot of good, bright things from Jay the writer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Abhinav. I mean, the book that eventually got made into Slumdog Millionaire was written by somebody who is 30 years ahead of me in the same system.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The Slumdog Millionaire, rags to riches story.
Yeah.
When I think of the civil service and writers, I always think of Kafka, and I don't really know that I don't know if I really wish the life of Kafka upon anybody. So, but yeah, great.
We have multiple castles here at work. Kafka's castle. We have several of them around here.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh. Yeah, so let's open it up a little bit. If there are any other questions, let's talk a little bit. Ashvani, Ram?
Yeah, I actually have some thoughts and questions actually. So what you said about the emotional connect with the reader, you distinguished between the intellectual connect, logical connect, and the emotional connect. That's, I think, a very interesting thing, because there are multiple aspects to it, right? Because when I am writing, I am in a particular space because of who I am. I am a male of a particular age, coming from a certain demographic background with certain life experiences. Now, I am writing something, and I can only write something that is emotional. Most probably, I will have to draw in from my own personal experiences. I mean, at least that's my view, that if I have to bring emotion, it has to come from my personal experience. I cannot imagine an emotion. Right? Now, how does that connect with the reader, who is of a different gender, who is of a different age, who is of a different demographic background? And to top it, as if this is not enough, I have a character who is also probably not of my gender, my demographic background. So how does that connect happen?
I wish I had prepared. I wish I had thought, like, I could get ZZ Packer's story up here. So we're not really talking about emotion. We're not talking about the character's emotion, like whether, they saw a dog got run over and they're sad. Okay, so we're not talking about emotion like that, or they were happy because they'd been bitten by a dog. We're talking about the internal struggle of character, which I basically am saying that when we think about our character and our protagonist entering in their story, that we want to try and imagine that character in a full way. It's not us, right, in a sense.
That's right.
But they are going to be the creation of us, because we're both going to cast their external struggle, right, the antagonistic force that they meet, and we're going to cast that and make it happen. But we also need to understand, essentially, well, we call it the internal struggle or the internal conflict. And that internal conflict is actually a result of their backstory, in a sense. It doesn't matter what the backstory is, and I'm not telling you to write the backstory. Their backstory is manifest in their internal struggle. So I'll just tell you what happens. I feel like it's quintessentially classically written, ZZ Packer's story, Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, that was published in the New Yorker, and I've taught it many, many times. But she basically fulfills this function of, in the first paragraph, she presents the protagonist and antagonistic forces. Her first sentence is this. I've taught it so often, I think I have it memorized. Orientation games began the day I arrived at Yale from Baltimore. Okay, so orientation games began the day I arrived at Yale from Baltimore. So I and Baltimore are connected.
Right.
She comes from Baltimore. She
Right.
arrives at Yale. Those are the two forces. Boom. I've also asked this, and I think it's also brilliant in that sentence. Absolutely 100% brilliant. What is that story about? It's about orientation in a larger sense, right? So, right? It's about orientation. So it starts with its subject. Orientation games the day I began. And then it follows by talking about these Yale students. ZZ Packer's black, they're white, they're Yaleys, they're a bunch of geniuses, and they're going to play a game of trust, right? The character that ZZ is writing about does not trust these white, geeky, rich students from Yale. That's her internal conflict. Her internal conflict is not personal. That conflict is universal. We all don't trust. We're all guarded. So that's her internal struggle. And then brilliantly, from that, the orientation instructor says, okay, it's time for you to fall backwards and be caught by these people. And her character says, I'd rather play Russian roulette. When she says that, she gets recommended to go talk to the psychologist. Right? so this basically starts the story. This is
Right.
It's so wonderful. And now we actually, from that point onward, we actually have a dual structure where she goes to the dorm and she meets a girl, her roommate, or maybe it's some girl who's like picked on and, sort of ostracized, and they develop a relationship. That's the external story.
Okay.
Simultaneously, we go back and forth with her meetings with the psychologist, which is the internal struggle. Now, that might be too easy. It's a little bit like if you've seen The Sopranos employ the exact same thing. They
Right.
have Tony Soprano is seeing a psychologist. The fact that he's seeing a psychologist suggests his weakness. In the A story, he's only strong. In the B story, he shows his vulnerability,
Right.
right? That's the tension. If the people that he lived with and deal with all the time understood that he was a vulnerable person, he would be killed, right?
Right.
So he never shows any vulnerability up here, but he shows it in the B story. ZZ
Okay.
Packer's story uses the same thing, but it shouldn't be just like thinking about psychologists. What it is moving between the A story and the B story. In Bonnie and Clyde, they rob banks.
Right. Yeah.
In the B story, they have picnics and fall in love.
Right.
Right? And so this is what we really want to think about. So ZZ's story presents right in the first paragraph, basically presents the external struggle. I arrived at Yale. That's the external. And the internal struggle. I don't trust these people.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So it actually, and so for ZZ, it's not, like I'm saying, it's not personal. It's not based on her gender or her
Right. It
race
is
or
not. Right.
any of that. It's universal, and it must be. And so when I read that story, because so, I mean, maybe you have the thing like I might say, oh, I don't want to read about a black woman going to Yale. I didn't go to Yale, and I'm not black and I'm not a woman, so I might have those problems, but I don't have those problems. Okay,
Right.
that's on me.
Yeah.
I am able to read and say, I'm immersed in this character's struggle. That's that. I think in a sense that's why you even start, like she might even start with the external struggle, because I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Right? That's the drive. What's going to happen? She arrived from Baltimore at Yale. What's going to happen? The B story is why I care.
Right.
To go back to the cricket match, right? So the external struggle is the two teams, right? And what's going to happen between the two teams. But if I don't care about either team, I'm not going to spend, how long is a cricket match? It's like 3 days. I'm not going to spend 3 days watching it.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend 5 minutes reading the story. My time is too precious to do
Right.
things I don't care about. And then then I think it's important for us to kind of think about, well, why do I care? Why do I care? Do I care because I'm supposed to care? No, I do not care because I'm supposed to care. I don't care. I don't care because it's a character that ZZ wrote. I don't care for any of those reasons. I care because the character I see has a struggle like mine, and I care about myself. And I think that when I arrive at the resolution of this story, I'm going to learn something that's going to be important for me and my own struggle. Basically, I'm saying that I care because I'm a selfish bastard.
Right. Mhm.
It's hard for me to come to a different conclusion than that, but it isn't. But that's a little bit cynical because this is the thing about us, right? We are us. We understand that, and we understand that they are someone else.
Right.
So you know what? No matter how much I might empathize, I don't feel their pain, right? I don't. But what we're doing in writing is we're taking this reader who does not feel the pain of this character, and we're merging them together. Now, this is the most important thing that we do, I think. This is where my writing centers on. I want to merge the reader with that character. That's an experience we do not ever have in life. That's what's so unusual in stories, is that we have this capacity to do it. I even think that it's something that we can do in written stories even more profoundly than we can do in, for example, movies. I think that this is actually where written stories are superior to movies, because in movies, right, we have two characters. The audience is always, in a sense, objectifying. I might identify, I might or wish to identify in a fantasy realization with Bruce Willis, but I'm still looking at him.
Yeah.
But in writing, orientation games began the day I started at Yale. That I becomes me. We're merged together. That's what makes writing stories. I mean, that's our strength. And so not to break away in a second, but I think last week I said we're in competition as writers with everything that has ever been written, every movie that's ever been made, every museum, every nature. I like to mountain biking, climbing Everest. We're in competition with everything.
Right.
So how do we compete? Do we compete by jumping around to multiple points of view and, writing about explosions? Our explosions don't look that good on the page. Our strength is this merger that we can create on the page by creating a unified consciousness through writing and its interaction with the brain of the reader. It's a very, very powerful thing, and I do not sell it short. I would put that against anything.
Yeah.
If you can get them to open the book.
Of course. Yeah, that's very powerful. Yeah. So basically, it is not about the individualistic or personal struggles, but to find that universal theme in that struggle.
Right. And in Zizi's story, finally, right? So if I suggest that the struggle of the beginning, right, ends up being resolved at the ending, that is what happens in Zizi's story, but it is not actually resolved positively, in a sense.
Okay.
The character in Zizi's story is given the opportunity to trust now after this journey, and she refuses it.
Okay.
We'll leave it to interpretation about whether that was a good, but when this goes along with a sort of theory of mine, is that we merge these characters along, and then in a sense that's a tragic outcome for that character, that she's not able to take a step to trust and then be also to love and be loved, in a sense, at the end of that story. But I suggest when we get to that sort of tragic ending, that the reader sort of separates and says, well, I would make a different choice. Bring the character to a point of choice. We cannot say what they choose. That depends on them.
Right.
But the reader has gone on this journey also, and they might say, oh, they took that choice. And if they feel sad, for example, that they took that choice, that suggests that they would try and take a different choice. They might not in reality.
Right.
But there's a sort of psychic separation at that point. Or it seems to me, if we take the story through and the protagonists arrive, we are merged with them, and they arrive at a choice in which they essentially ascend and change and rise, we go with them. So that's like at the Hollywood happy ending, right? Or the tragic ending. Or the tragic ending. And actually, that's how I see comedy and tragedy. Comedy is where we're allowed to merge, and ascend with the protagonist. That's a comic ending. The tragic ending is when we must separate from them.
Right.
So Hamlet, for example, right? We don't stick with Hamlet when he's poisoned and dies. It's sort of like you don't die in your dreams, they say. We don't we don't want to die in our dreams. So we go through this dreamscape of the story. Well, when the character dies or, metamorphosizes into the dead cockroach, as in Kafka, we separate and we go our own way. Except for in the Kafka story, of course, we don't see any alternative. There is no choice in Kafka's story. So yeah. So it's not
right.
So like you say, if you say I'm a man and I'm coming from this sort of circumstance and I can only write my emotions, this is the struggle that we have to start digging deeper. And so it becomes this thing, if we say it's the universal, you know, we want to touch upon the universal, not the particular in this case.
Right.
The particular is I arrived at Yale. Okay, I did not arrive at Yale. The universe, that is the particular, and stories deal with the particular and the universal. We do both. That it's particular and universal actually makes it safer for the reader to have the experience.
Right.
Right? Because it's like, ZZ's character has a serious trust issue, and I have serious trust issues.
Right.
You know, everyone on Earth does, because we get hurt by other people, right? So we all have that, but I don't really want to investigate my trust issues, but
Right.
I can because of the particularity of this character.
Yeah.
So the character here is me and not me. That's crucial. It returns a little bit to Jay's story a little bit, because Jay's protagonist is not particular enough. I'm not able to participate in the struggle as easily, because I need both. I need the universal and the particular. The particular keeps me safe. ZZ's character is me and not me. Very important.
Right.
Another question. We'll just talk a couple more minutes, and then I think we'll end a bit early. Is there another question from anyone?
Yeah, hi, it's me. I was thinking about Beckett's story. Samuel Beckett. He wrote. We know him mostly for drama, but he's also written short stories. And when I read his stories, they're quite compelling, and they're just full of so many ideas. But you can't make out what's happening. So that's the intellectual connection that we make. There is an emotional connection, but it's in bits and pieces, because it's so weird at times. You can't put the puzzle together, and it's more of an intellectual exercise. But it's still, he's supposed to be one of the greatest writers, all-time writers. So I mean, should we try to emulate it, or we should not try to go there?
Well, I think that it's really important to recognize, like in literature, for us, that we're moving through time. You know, so Beckett was important in his time and in his context.
Okay.
I saw Waiting for Godot at Stanford. I sat there just going like, what the hell am I doing here? I guess I have to do this because it's Beckett, right? And then it was over, and I walked away, and I noticed that no one else was leaving, and I was like, oh my God, that was just the first half.
Right.
I didn't go back. So, you know, for me, I go back to that selfish thing. I am a selfish man. You know, my time is too precious. There's too many things. I get things from the world all the time. I was getting nothing from Beckett. So a postmodern work that I like so much more is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. My God, that moved me. I think I still would be. I mean, I was just crushed and amazed, and my mind was blown. And that was intellectual, but it was finally emotional. And how was it emotional? It was actually doing something that the anthologies and this anthology work are doing. It took minor characters and it humanized them.
Okay.
And I identified with those minor characters. I saw my life in their life. And actually, I wrote a long story called Minor Characters that nothing really happened with, in which I basically cast my life as I was a minor character and everyone else's major character experience. And I just sort of traveled along as a minor character. But it really profoundly influenced me, that play.
Right.
We make our choices. We have to make our choices. And some people want to pursue the experimental and the intellectual. I have come to the place where I feel like, well, that's me wanting to be recognized. That's ego on my side. I'm not, I want people to say, oh, well, Otis is a genius. Look at how smart this is. God, if anyone says that to me, I'm going to be, that's going to hurt.
In fact, some people say that people like to have Beckett's short story collection on the shelf, but they seldom go to the end of it, because it gets so complicated.
We just have to make our choices what path we want to take. Every path leads to the same place, so so we just make our choices. But I know, our experiences are different. That's why they say, find out what you like, right? If you like it, right, that's saying that it's doing something for you. It is. So if it is that kind of intellectual work, then maybe that is the correct path. I know, I have stories, there are stories that I've read that I feel happened to me and have made me who I am. That's what I like. And that's also what I want to do and produce for other people.
All right. That's a nice way to look at life. Yeah, to look at work. Right. Mm-hmm. That was fun. Thanks.
But, and you see, I remember everything in stories. So even Beckett, so my Beckett story is not about Beckett's story at all. I can't tell you a single thing about Waiting for Godot. Not one thing.
Right.
But I can tell you the story of me going and watching it, walking out when it was over, and then seeing that everyone was still standing there and going, oh no.
Right. Okay. What about Harold Pinto? His plays are abstract, but they do have that cruelty in it, and we see ourselves as vulnerable people in a cruel world, I think, and that's where we start empathizing with the character. But it is essentially an intellectual work, I think.
I don't know Pinter that much, so I don't have anything to reference. When we talk about the spectrum like that, there are things on the spectrum. So like, Kafka, what I call it a metamorphosis story, and I think the other week I talked about my friend Leslie Tenorio that I feel also wrote essentially metamorphosis story. It begins at A and it just goes to A dead A, right? It's just a downward trajectory. And so I like the shape of hopefulness. I feel a responsibility to humanity to provide some catharsis for the difficulty of our struggle, not to reinforce it. The reinforcement of difficulty and meaninglessness is all around us. So I don't take that as my job. I want to be useful, right? I don't see that being useful because it's already pretty much covered, so I want to do something else. But I think about, some of the most disturbing works. Jerzy Kosinski's Painted Bird is so disturbing. I don't write that either. We have to make our choices about what we want to do. What I want to do is I want to deal with anything possible. I am open to everything to write about as a subject, but I want to give my protagonist a choice. I can't control what choice they make. That will depend on them, I guess. If they're not under my control, which I think they aren't, kind of. I can't control what choice they make, but I want to give them a choice. Then we see, and then what I'm producing is this experience for the reader to be able to experience trouble, difficulty, the struggle of life, the struggle of trying to cope with their internal struggle through this externally plotted means, that they can have that experience in safety, basically. That they can have that experience removed from it in their own life and maybe perhaps learn from it and take something from it. That's my purpose. Right? So that's why I have the particular and the universal. Right? I mean, I'm basically finally producing something. I'm producing something for the reader. That's my aspiration. And in a way, it's also for myself, right? Because I know how much I've needed stories to get me through.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
That's why it's a noble calling that we're doing this. I mean, and I really have nothing but admiration for anyone who takes on this difficulty. It's just so extraordinarily difficult, but I think it really is. I don't know. It's a testament that there's something decent about human beings, that we do this for others.
Right. Okay, thanks. That helps.
Yeah. And as I've said, it's there isn't, with our storytelling, I don't believe there's any arrival. And I think, sort of today and talking about Jay's work, some of this is talking about, our aspiration, and then we just try to do it. We try to do it as well as we can. That's it. And then it really becomes, as we have to become, as Hemingway said, no story, no piece of work is ever finished, only abandoned.
Right.
So we have a sense of aspiration, we have a sense of goal, we have our aesthetics, and we have, our sense of, I'm not sure if they're exactly values, because we want them to be more porous maybe than what values usually are, but we have that thing and we drive towards that in order to try and do this kind of spectacular thing for our readership and for ourselves and explore the world through this method. And then we try to do it, and then we send it out, and then we try to do it again and we send it out, and that's our path.
Yeah.
Last question, or shall we call it the end of our weekend?
Looks like it's a wrap now. Thank you so much for joining in, and do send in your pieces. We had one piece got some really interesting discussions around it, but we'd love to see more pieces coming in from people. And I know I had sent one a few weeks back, and I'm due for another one. I'll try and send that, but everyone, please do. And we'll put this recording up on YouTube in a couple of days, and we will speak with you all next week.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.